And now for this evening's program, it is my pleasure to introduce a woman who had the best titled program I have ever had at the library. This is Dr. Rivka Fidel. She is the Associate Professor of Practice in the Department of Environmental Science at the University of Arizona. And she will talk about pyrolysis. Can the dark side of fire save our climate? And she will explain it all to you. So welcome, Rivka. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you everybody for having me here today. As Joan said, I'll be talking about pyrolysis, which I personally like to call the dark side of fire, and how it could possibly save our climate. So in case you're wondering how I got into pyrolysis and how I got here in Arizona, this was inspired by, of all things, a book, actually. In a class at Union College in New York, environmental philosophy of all things, we had to read State of the World, which was about climate change and what to do about it, and look at that with an ethical lens. And in that book, I found this figure that was really intriguing to me, because it showed that we can store carbon in the soil. And we could do that not only with what things you might normally think of as sustainable agriculture, like perennials and tree crops and rotational grazing, but also with this interesting stuff called biochar, which is produced through pyrolysis. And so that sent me from Union College up in New York to Iowa State University, where I studied pyrolysis, and particularly the effects of biochar on soil, that pyrolysis product. And when I finished up my PhD, I got really interested in teaching. My favorite part of studying pyrolysis and biochar was explaining it to others and talking about it with others. And so I brought that into teaching, and I teach intro soil science and environmental soil and water chemistry here at the University of Arizona. So looking at the big picture here, our climate is not doing well, as many of you know, and in order to keep things within a safe level of warming, the generally agreed target temperature to limit warming to is about 1.5 degrees Celsius. And to reach that, we're going to have to achieve, it's quite uncertain, but the average predictions are around 350 to 400 parts per million. So how do we get there exactly? Well, first, the biggest culprit is coal. We have to stop burning coal, and then improve land usage. And it would be really nice if we could also cut all fossil fuels, but as you know, that is politically challenging. So what can we do, and what do we have to do? So if you look at the International Panel on Climate Change report, we must use both energy and land use in agriculture to go net carbon negative somewhere around mid-century, depending on how you count. And there's a lot of different sectors that can contribute to that. So I want to point out bioelectricity with carbon capture and storage is where the focus of this presentation is mostly on, and also agriculture, forestry, and other land use. And notice that there's some heavy hitters among agriculture, forestry, and land use that can offset, reduce a lot of emissions there. And then also fuel switching is important as well, switching to electricity in some cases, natural gas is a bridge fuel, which is, in my mind, not the best approach, but it's on there. And then bioenergy. So by the way, if anyone, I know there's a lot of charts here. I'm pointing out what I hope are relatively simple parts of the charts, but if you need me to slow down and explain a graph in more detail at any time, please let me know. Anyway, so on this one, I just wanted to point out that given the level of uncertainty here, we would have to reach net zero CO2 emissions by mid-century, and then this is all the greenhouse gas emissions. Those would meet, those we would have to get neutral or negative closer to the end of the century, around 2080 to 2090. So how exactly do we get there? Well, there's a combination of reducing the emissions, which is shown in the bars that are on top here. These are different scenarios. The names aren't relevant in this case, but they are in the IPCC report if you want to look them up. And nearly all these proposed pathways, you'll notice, have this peach colored bar in them, 4 out of 5 of these pathways, and nearly all of the ones in the report have that. And that refers to CDR, carbon dioxide removal. So that means you're either pulling carbon dioxide out of the air straight, which is direct air capture, and very, very inefficient, very expensive, or you're capturing carbon dioxide from emissions from some kind of power plant, which is most of where these what these bars pertain to. And so the report relies heavily on this to make recommendations as to how we would reach those net zero emissions. And I would further caution, going beyond the report, that there's a danger in relying overmuch on carbon negative technologies. I'm a big fan of them, but we don't want to use them as an excuse to emit more carbon dioxide, an excuse to burn more fossil fuels, thinking that, oh, we can just pull the carbon dioxide back out. No, it's quite expensive, and we don't want to do that. So, so what can we do? Well, that brings us back to pyrolysis. And before I explain that, I want to show you how scientists came about this process of pyrolysis. So the idea of using this technology came from native peoples. The native Amazonian peoples had these sites where they deposited char on the soil. We don't know if they did it on purpose or by accident, but the places where native people in the Amazon deposited this char onto the soil were very dark and very fertile compared with natural tropical soils, which are actually not that fertile because the microbes use up all of the organic matter and turn it into virtually all of it, over 99%, and turn it into carbon dioxide. And that's why rainforests have such problems coming back from fire. It's because the nutrients aren't really in the soil. The productivity of rainforests comes from the living things and the microorganisms giving nutrients straight back to the plants after the plants have died and start decomposing. So scientists were really perplexed by this. Why is the organic matter in the terra preta soils persisting for so long? Well, it's because the char in those soils lasts a really long time. And there's other natural soils that actually exhibit this. In the Midwest, such as in Iowa, we find a lot of grassland soils that have experienced frequent fires, and this leaves behind char. And in that char over time enriches the soil. Now, fire is still a net loss of carbon to the atmosphere, but this char nonetheless contributes 10 to 30% of the carbon in Iowa soils, for example. And that was verified that that was actually char by my mentor, David Laird at Iowa State. And so this led us to the biochar question, which is also the biochar and pyrolysis question. Can we make our own terra preta soils? Can we improve soil quality and sequester carbon by making our own char through pyrolysis and applying it to soil? And so char is, I'm going to explain, but basically it's just, it's the black stuff that's left over from fire, and that is coming up. Okay, so biochars are not one thing. They're a very diverse suite of man-made pyrolyzed charred materials intended for soil application. The broader term char refers to the just any pyrolyzed organic material. And by organic, I mean, it came from a living thing recently. So we're not talking about fossil fuels here. We can't make biochar from fossil fuels because fossil fuels are from ancient living organisms, and we must make biochar from recently living organisms. So we can make biochar from lots of materials called feedstocks, such as tree prunings, corn cobs, even bone or bamboo, or wood waste, and other plant waste like parts of seeds that we don't actually eat, and even rabbit droppings. So what is this pyrolysis process that helps us make the biochar? Well, it's the first dark step, fire. Fire, combustion is the technical term, is comprised of two steps. First, pyrolysis, and then oxidation. So pyrolysis is a reaction that occurs when solid fuels, so in our case, making biochar, we're talking about biomass feedstocks, plant materials, or paper waste, cardboard waste. When those are exposed to high temperatures, lots of heat, and low oxygen conditions, this produces flammable gases, oils, and char. And then if we apply that char to the soil, we call it biochar. Then the second step of combustion occurs when there is oxygen. One moment, I have to switch those settings here. So we need oxygen here. And that oxygen reacts with the gases and oils and char that were produced during pyrolysis. And this produces your usual expected outputs of fire, carbon dioxide, and water. So how exactly does this work? Well, if we just consider a simple case like a match burning, what's going on closest to the match, actually within the match, is that there's this zone of low oxygen right here, because oxygen, first of all, cannot go into a solid very easily. Secondly, once this oxidation process begins, that oxygen gets consumed very rapidly. And so that keeps the oxygen concentration in and adjacent to the fuel, like a match, very, very low. And this allows for just pyrolysis to occur in this low oxygen zone. Then above the low oxygen zone, assuming that you haven't snuffed out your match yet, we have a zone where the gases produced through pyrolysis, as well as some of the oils, which are temporarily gases, they've evaporated, start reacting with that oxygen. So these two guys are reacting with the oxygen up here. And that reaction with the oxygen and the flammable gases is what produces light. So oxidation is responsible for the flame you see in fire, whereas pyrolysis is dark, hence the dark side of fire. So what is in all this stuff that we're pyrolyzing, and what's the difference after we pyrolyze it? Okay, thank you. Biomass contains a lot of what we call biopolymers, really big, complicated molecules like cellulose, hemicellulose, and lignin. Then during pyrolysis, we convert that to biochar, which has what we call big condensed aromatic rings. These honeycomb structures are really important. And then bio oil contains much smaller molecules that are flammable, and the gas we call syngas, that has even smaller molecules, and two of the ones shown here, hydrogen and methane, are flammable, and then carbon monoxide and CO2 are not flammable. So we can perform pyrolysis in various ways. The four main ways are slow pyrolysis, which takes hours to days, fast pyrolysis, much faster, hence the name. The newest one is autothermal pyrolysis, and I'll explain that and as we go through here. And then the last one is gasification. So let's take a look at slow pyrolysis first. This one's really simple. It's used to create traditional charcoal. And you might see a flame here, but that's just happening at the top. The majority of the vessel is undergoing pyrolysis, not oxidation. And the traditional, like sort of not beyond traditional, the ancient way of making char is to just throw your biomass in a pit and then light it on fire, cover it. That step's not shown here, but cover it to smother it and then let it smolder and pyrolyze for a long time. The soil keeps out the oxygen and you end up with char after like a day. But there's a lot of modern systems. Now, slow pyrolysis isn't perfect. Some systems, if they don't have appropriate control measures in place, like a well-designed chimney, they might have way too much smoke. And that smoke is actually really bad, not only for your lungs, but for the climate, because it contains stuff that's really similar to char, but not soot and particulate matter. And that causes an acute localized warming effect. And that would negate the benefits of pyrolysis. Then fast pyrolysis is well, it's really fast. It optimizes bio-oil yield, and the way we do that is first you heat up a bunch of sand, and then you introduce the feedstock into a cyclone with the sand, and then that hot sand touches the feedstock, which this can be just ground up plant mass, finely ground wood, sawdust, and touches that and instantly pyrolyzes pretty much. And then you collect the char and cool everything off and collect the bio oil. And then the stuff that doesn't stay as in a gas form goes back to feed the burner and heat everything up again. Now, fast pyrolysis has a major drawback in that sometimes you have to use some extra natural gas in addition to the syngas produced from the process itself. So, So to address that, my former colleagues at Iowa State University came up with a new method called autothermal pyrolysis. In this process, we allow in a little bit of oxygen. And this enables us to not use additional fuel inputs, and you end up with a higher yield of bio oil. So fast pyrolysis optimizes bio oil yield, right? Autothermal does one step further, optimizes it even more. But you do get lower biochar and syngas yields. So, so you just carefully control the amount of oxygen coming in by supplying instead nitrogen gas, like we saw in the fast pyrolysis system, and just mix that in just enough to provide heat through a very tiny, tiny amount of combustion. And then, like before, we collect the bio oil and the syngas, and you can use the syngas to power the process again, but ideally you wouldn't have to. And then last but not least is gasification. This technology has been around for a very, very long time. We just weren't that creative about what we did with the resulting char, and we didn't call it biochar. But gasification optimizes the production of syngas. And actually Germany used this during World War II when they didn't have enough natural gas. They were gasifying coal. So this allows in more oxygen than autothermal pyrolysis in order to optimize that syngas production, and the amount of time it takes is kind of variable. And yeah, a lot of the time gasification is run at too high of a temperature to produce biochar at all, and you just get ash, which is the inorganic stuff, no carbon, hardly any carbon left. It's just white with lots of minerals, and there's more types of gasifiers, which I'm not going to get into. And we can make these pyrolyzers at many, many different scales, ranging from 2 pound per day backyard pyrolyzers or little cook stoves to 50-ton per day pyrolyzers or gasifiers. And there's probably nowadays 100, even 200 tons per day ones out there. So these can be, when you operate pyrolyzer at a small scale, you're probably using like a backyard system. So in that case, you would use plant waste from your garden, like yard trimmings or the parts of your fruits and veggies that you don't eat, and then dry those out and pyrolyze them, apply them back to the soil. That helps you grow more food, and then you can, and other plants, and you can then harvest those again and pyrolyze your plant waste again. So this is a self-reinforcing cycle. Now, one downside of these small backyard pyrolyzers is that they're almost universally slow pyrolysis or sometimes gasification ones, and you can't collect the bio oil or the syngas. And some of these cook stove type small pyrolyzers can actually be used to reduce air pollution in developing countries, because a lot of developing countries have homes where people are cooking over open flames, and this really reduces indoor air quality. And so switching to a cook stove style pyrolyzer or gasifier can really help reduce those hazards, and also fight climate change, because we're not producing as much soot that causes warming. And you can make one of these small ones if you are interested, but please do use with caution and do so outdoors if possible, and if not, in a fireplace. Then if we look at larger scales, they would look something like this. You would have to grow your crop, maybe like corn or wheat or something, and take the part of a crop that you are not eating, like wheat straw or corn stover, ship that to a pyrolyzing facility, and that pyrolyzing facility would then send bio oil to a refinery where it would be refined to various biofuels. And then the biochar would go back to the farm, or perhaps another farm, depending on what's going on. And that would be used to increase crop yields at that farm so that you end up with more biomass and so on and so forth. And well, you might be wondering, does it matter which scale we use? The short answer is probably not. In terms of prices, at least, they're not significantly different. It's a little hard to find information about the climate impacts at these different scales at the moment, but generally the fuel prices are proportional to the amount of fuel you're actually burning to transport things. So surprisingly, it didn't seem to be that bad. So both scales are helpful. It depends what you want to do. And the main thing is that you use design your system wisely and use the products of the system, the bio oil and the biochar, mainly syngas if applicable, wisely. So I mentioned biochar. Well, biochar is that it's wise to use the biochar wisely. And what I'm getting at here is biochar is the main reason that this whole process is carbon negative. And biochar also improves soil quality in various ways, hence the yield increase. So how exactly does it do all this stuff? Well, we'll start with the atmospheric benefits. So the reason why pyrolysis is not the same as just burning plant material in terms of climate impact is because with pyrolysis, we are actually converting about 1/4 to 1/2 of the input material, the usually plant material, into biochar. Whereas if you had just let that plant material fall onto the ground and start decomposing in the soil, that material would become carbon dioxide once more. Biochar is unique in that it persists in the soil for hundreds to thousands of years due to these honeycomb structures I pointed out to you guys earlier. So ordinary organic matter, uncharred organic matter, the raw plant stuff, is really delicious for microbes, but they really don't want to eat these condensed aromatic honeycomb things. Not yummy. Biochar is not yummy. So it will stay in the soil. And that is important because normally the carbon goes back into the atmosphere whether you apply the plant material to the soil or burn it. But if you use pyrolysis, about 1/4 to 1/2 of that carbon ends up in the biochar for hundreds of thousands of years, and the rest you would be converting to syngas or bio oil and burning. So only 1/2 would return to the atmosphere, perhaps 75% at most, and the rest stays in the soil. And so how exactly does it increase yield and do all those other fun things? Well, it comes down to biochar's properties. Biochar has pores that help it hold onto water. It has a charge to it, a negative or a positive charge that attracts oppositely charged things. That's sticky, like it's a sorbent. It's like a Brita filter, basically. And And then it also helps regulate the soil pH as a buffer, and it can increase the pH to lime agent. Really important in New York. You guys have acidic soils over there. If you want to grow a plant that likes more alkaline soil or neutral pH soil, biochar could be really helpful. Then biochar is also a habitat for lots of organisms due to all those pores. It creates a nice home for beneficial organisms. And I already mentioned that it's stable in soil. So it does all these fun things like neutralizing acid soils and filtering, helping soil filter water better. You can make filters out of it too. And you could also use it to restore degraded or polluted soil because the contaminants stick to the biochar instead of being taken up by plants. So so we can integrate biochar into the various systems. So this is an example of designing a integrated cropping system and pyrolysis system in a smart way, where where coffee is being grown here and the coffee residue waste are pyrolyzed and used to sequester carbon. They can also be used to treat wastewater and build, make building and packaging materials. And then they could be co-applied with compost to soil. And that helps improve potentially the quantity and quality of the coffee being produced. You can use biochar to help with chicken production. So in this case, the biochar is, first, the gasifier is being used to heat the chicken house. And also you can add biochar to the bedding to help reduce harmful emissions from the chicken poop. And then you can turn that chicken poop into the char once more. You can also feed it to cows to reduce those pesky methane emissions. So there's lots of uses. I could go on forever. So before we run out of time, you might be wondering if biochar and or pyrolysis are too good to be true with all these amazing things. Can we have our cake and eat it too? Well, the short answer is it depends. So both biochars and soils are really diverse, and there's also many options for types of pyrolysis systems to choose from that affect the biochar quality. And soil itself is complex, so it's really hard to find a system that works. So to summarize, biochar and pyrolysis systems are really good for carbon sequestration. They can improve soil quality, and the effects last a really long time. It's not like compost that you have to keep applying. You can just apply it once potentially. But the benefits can be inconsistent. There's dust and fire hazard risks. This is flammable stuff and very dusty. Sometimes they can be a little bit toxic if you're not careful, but there's approaches to avoid toxic biochars. And then pyrolyzers can be a bit expensive, and we don't want to incentivize people to go run out into the forest, cut down trees, and make biochar with it for carbon credits or whatever. Destroying ecosystems is a net negative no matter what you're doing with the wood. So when should we actually use pyrolysis and biochar? Well, there's a lot of trade-offs in benefits. You might not see biochar, a single biochar yielding all the benefits I talked about. Usually it's just one or two, and if you try to maximize one, you're going to lose a different benefit. Same thing with choosing pyrolysis system. Remember, some pyrolysis systems were really good at making bio oil, and others were really good at making biochar. So you have to choose the biochar that's right for the soil and the pyrolysis system that is right for your agriculture or energy system. So you want it to fit in with your energy grid as well as the cropping systems nearby. So you might be wondering, how much is all of this going to cost? Well, once again, it depends, but we have some ballpark numbers. So the sources of variability are biochar feedstock, the type of crop being grown, what you're applying the biochar to, as well as how much the farmers are willing to pay for the biochar, the type of pyrolysis technology, and the price of carbon credits. So basically, if a company running a pyrolyzer can get a lot of money for the biochar, they can sell the bio oil for much cheaper. And again, if they're getting, similarly, if they're getting carbon credits from the government, then then they don't have to charge you as much for the bio oil. So you end up with a very wide range depending on all these things. Some anywhere from $1.23 to $5.16 per gallon, depending on whether you're in these examples, whether you're applying, say, wood char to a rice cropping system or a corn stover char to a corn cropping system. Those would yield a bio oil that would cost between like $3 and $4 on average. Whereas if you make biochar from switchgrass in Florida and then apply that biochar to peanuts, we're talking in the $1.50 to $2.50 range for that system. And so we end up with an average somewhere around $3 per gallon, which is actually really competitive with current gas prices. Now let's compare pyrolysis with other bioenergy technologies. So basically, that depends too. It just gets really complicated. Just hang on, bear with me. So when carbon prices are low, say less than $1,000 per ton, pyrolysis systems tend to be cost competitive. That's what this is showing here. Notice how to the left of this $1,000 line here, pyrolysis has greater profits in here. But if you were to do perform an equivalent process, burn biomass, and then try to capture the carbon dioxide, that would yield lower profits when the price of carbon is below $1,000 per ton. So that's the price that the government would pay you to sequester carbon. And getting that price to be really high is, of course, politically challenging. So we're going to be stuck in this low zone for a very long time, most likely. And then besides the cost, pyrolysis systems can also potentially preserve and or restore soil health. And if you apply to biochar. And then pyrolysis is, unique among, all right. One moment, no. Oh, okay, it's back. So pyrolysis also generates a number of products that we would not get if we just burn biomass or if we were to make like corn ethanol. Pyrolysis replaces the whole barrel. All the things that we can make from petroleum, we can make pretty well from bio oil too. And so that includes some high value products like jet fuels and also things like plastic. So there's a lot of side benefits. And then basically you get better benefits if you're applying biochar to really infertile soil. That increases the yield more, that soil stands more to gain from biochar. Also, if you are replacing coal with bioenergy, it doesn't matter what bioenergy you're picking because coal is so bad that just anything's going to be better. So if you're replacing natural gas or if you're applying biochar to really, really poor soils, it's a win. And let's not forget about the elephant in the room. So fossil fuel subsidies currently contribute to our fuel prices. So direct global subsidies cost governments about, and hence citizens, about $450 billion per year. And then tax breaks to fossil fuel producers are an additional $350 billion per year. So, and then when we account for the environmental and social costs of fossil fuels, we're talking 5.9 trillion. And so the price of gasoline in different countries is low, artificially low, and this is showing that the really dark countries on here are lower by about $7.56 per gallon. The United States has gasoline prices that are about $1.50 to $3 per gallon less than their true cost. So if we were to change that cost, then A, pyrolysis produced bio oil would become a lot more competitive, and B, people would buy less fuel. And so both those would be good for the climate. Not so good for your wallets in the short term, unfortunately. So we need policies that change things gradually rather than hitting us with it all at once. And so what does all this stuff do together for the climate, not just our wallets? Biochar and pyrolysis systems, it's the same thing, offset 12%, up to 12% of greenhouse gas emissions. And depending on what year we're looking at, that's that's about 1.8 gigatons of carbon per year. But biomass combustion, on the other hand, would only offset about 10% of emissions. And we can't do them both at the same time. We have to use the biomass for only one thing. So that means we have 88% else to make up. So pyrolysis is really, really great, but it's not the only solution. We can't just rely on that. It's advantageous in that it's a cheap way to get carbon dioxide out of the air because the plants do all of our work for us, and then pyrolysis locks that carbon into soil stable biochar. But again, we do have to use other methods to reach climate goals, and some of the top things we need to do besides use pyrolysis are, of course, cut fossil fuels and refrigerant leaks, reduce meat consumption, reduce food waste, and protect our natural ecosystems. And there's a whole list and a quiz and everything. It's really cool if you go to Project Drawdown at drawdown.org. So the bottom line is that pyrolysis systems and the biochars they produce are not a silver bullet. They are indispensable tools, however, for climate change mitigation and soil management in conjunction with other tools. So thank you, everyone, and thank you to all of my mentors and collaborators who have helped me research biochar and pyrolysis.
I am just totally amazed. I never heard of pyrolysis before. I had no idea what it does. And it seems right, it's not a silver bullet, but it's an amazing system that, I mean, I don't think anyone I even know knows what this is. And you said it started in ancient times, right? And that's, in very primitive ways.
It's a natural process, but
right.
we harness it with pyrolyzers, and those are more modern.
Right, I understand that, but
yeah.
It's I wonder if you should advertise this to garden clubs and garden systems. I don't think anyone knows this. I know certain people would probably latch on to this because what they do is compost only.
Yeah, so you can buy biochar at some gardening stores. It's kind of hard to find. Yeah, yep, it's just not that well advertised, or it's not conveyed clearly what it is, because you might see the brand name of the biochar really big on the
And
bag,
you
and it
don't
might not
know.
say biochar. Yeah, or might be a biochar compost blends. But I did give a talk for gardeners. So for anybody who's interested in gardening, I can get you that link in just a minute here. But Googling biochar workshop, University of Arizona, yields this result.
It's just an amazing process that I never heard of. And considering all the benefits you could have, that chart you had with jet fuel and plastics, it was, it's something, it's the future, but it's the future that we've known about. And I wonder how we could how this could be publicized for more people to understand better. Well,
Yeah,
that's one of the reasons you're doing library programs, and we really want to thank you, because this is the perfect venue for you to publicize this information in the library. And I hope everyone here, do you have any questions? You could type them in the chat function, and could just in the information in the website. So if you're interested in that, I saw it said kiln in that.
yeah, so I gave the first talk in a workshop that included information about using biochar in gardens, and like when and how to use it. And then there's a presentation from Darren McCavoy, and he's with he's from Utah, and he shows how to operate an actual kiln to make
Okay.
biochar. Mhm.
Somebody asked if after 1,000,000 years or so, does
Yeah.
biochar turn into coal?
It should not become exactly coal. So coal is formed when organisms, like other fossil fuels, when old organisms are buried under high heat and pressure conditions. But those are also, at first at least, moist conditions. And so there's actually the coal is not the same as biochar. It does have that. It does have a lot of the same properties of biochar, but you would not want to apply it to soil because it has trace heavy metals in it.
Oh, that's what you said that.
And there is char that occurs naturally. The char that was in the soil that I showed you guys from Iowa, that was natural char in the soil. Most soil does contain, let me see if I can get this to, most soil does contain natural char in it to a small degree, and we call that char black carbon. So
Okay.
natural char in soil that you did not add intentionally, that may have been there already for hundreds of thousands of years, is called black
Right.
carbon. So the terra preta carbon, that's black carbon also. So biochar, like I guess they're all, there would be natural black carbon, I'm sorry. And a lot of people will call the biochar that's been in there for a long time black carbon too.
Black carbon.
Yeah.
It was amazing that first image that you showed us of the two cross section of the soil. That was,
Oh, the terra preta.
yeah.
Yeah. So oh,
That should interest many
I
people.
think, yeah. So what so yeah, these terra preta soils are very rich in that char, that, and
Mhm.
so are but not in an obvious way, Iowa soils. Iowa soils are already dark, practically black, due to other types of organic matter, not just black carbon. And so it's a bit different. But yeah, most soils, because wildfires happen in most ecosystems, do have a significant amount of char. You wouldn't expect that much char to be found in tundra soils or desert soils, because those systems don't have dense enough vegetation to have frequent wildfires. but other places do have significant amount of black carbon, and grasslands have one of the highest fire frequencies, and that's why they have the highest amount of black carbon.
People just
Any
asked,
questions?
I forgot to prior,
Oh,
that they want to know if this presentation will be videotaped. It is videotaped. And then another question, it is so interesting based on indigenous knowledge. Is there a growing interest in the United States and Europe to incorporate this for climate action? Is there a political pushback? Do you know?
So the politics for biochar and pyrolysis are they're more niche than anything. Like the limiting factor appears to be just people not knowing what pyrolysis is. Also, it's not pushback, but there's regulatory hurdles because pyrolysis is a new process, biochar is a new system. So we have to get both the pyrolysis plants like approved by the EPA and the biochar approved by the USDA for soil application. And for a while, these were all getting approved one by one, which is not very efficient. And more recently, I don't know if this went through, but there was some legislation proposed at least to provide a framework for approving like standards to approve biochars in bulk as soil amendments, so that they don't have to be analyzed individually and approved. And they should be analyzed, but it could be analyzed by the company producing them, for example, or analyzed in a more efficient way. So yeah, we need a set of standards.
Sure. So it's a new industry,
quality.
right?
Yeah, I'm able to see the chat now. There was a question about slow and fast pyrolysis resulting in different biochar molecular structure. So I just wanted to show you this slide here. As we go from left to right here, we're increasing temperature. And notice how the aromatic cluster sizes get larger. This happens also with pyrolysis rate. So faster pyrolysis rates result in smaller clusters, and slower pyrolysis rates result in larger aromatic ring clusters. So we would expect fast pyrolysis biochars to have those smaller ring cluster sizes, and the slow pyrolysis to have larger aromatic ring cluster sizes, along with the gasification chars. Adding oxygen can also potentially add more functional groups, but it also reduces yield sometimes. Yeah.
I'm sorry, what does it
produces yield? It can increase the number of these functional groups, these oxygens that are hanging out on the end. These are what attract nutrients from the soil.
Oh, is that what you said? Yield, I see.
Yeah, yeah. So the gasification, I can make this bigger, I think. So, oops. So increasing the amount of oxygen supply could increase the amount of oxygen functional groups. Some of my colleagues have studied, and I want to study the effect of soaking the feedstock or mixing it with metals. And those metals supposedly catalyze some reactions between the biomass and, well, just catalyze reactions occurring in the biomass during pyrolysis, and create more of these functional groups in theory, especially groups that have a positive charge instead of these all have negative charges, but you can have ones with positive charges like this. And those would attract negatively charged compounds, which is hard to do. Activated carbons aren't very good at doing this. So we could potentially beat activated carbons in this way and produce something similar much more cheaply. So I'm trying to do that to remove PFASs. I just got funded.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. For Arizona, oh yeah, buffalo grass. Good question. So the char, so from wildfires, the benefits of the char are only seen after a really long time. We're talking hundreds to thousands of years, because adding char to soil during wildfires is like a soil formation process, and soils take thousands of years to form. And so it would take at least 100 years for that char to accumulate. So we wouldn't really see benefits from invasive buffalo grass burning in terms of the char accumulation here in Arizona. I wouldn't expect us to see that in our lifetimes. And the wildfires are hazardous to the other plants too, and to the rest of the ecosystem. So it's better to remove the buffalo grass. That said, you could harvest the buffalo grass. So for those of you not familiar with Arizona ecosystems, there's an invasive grass called buffalo grass.
Buffalo grass?
Buffalo.
Oh, buffalo? Okay.
Yeah, buffalo. Yeah, it's in the chat. Kristen posted.
Oh.
Yeah, so buffalo grass is invasive, and it's really hard to remove. But if you can collect it, you could potentially pyrolyze it, turn it into biochar, and that would have climate benefits. And it would also kill off the seeds for sure. Whereas if the buffalo grass is already producing seeds out in the wild, and you're just trying to get rid of it, as you try to, if you leave it sitting out there, those seeds might blow away and still distribute, unfortunately. So anyway,
Okay.
you can fight invasive species by pyrolyzing them, is what I'm saying, potentially. Yeah. But applying biochar to native natural ecosystems is very tricky, because if you put it on the surface in a dry ecosystem, it might blow away. And so you would have to mix it in, and that mixing process, tillage, that is, especially long-term, really bad for the soil. And so you have to like apply the biochar with compost or something like that, or apply biochar in a system that's already being tilled anyway for other reasons. So that's one of the practical challenges of biochar, is that you have to, you're kind of stuck with.
People didn't understand it because that question wasn't in the chat function. Somebody must have just sent it to you. So we didn't know. That's why we didn't know what kind of grass we were talking about. But there's another question that somebody said, could other material like plastics be converted to biochar?
Yes,
or materials from a landfill?
So it's stuff that you throw in the trash, especially plastics, and sometimes certain paper products are frequently problematic. First of all, they can contain heavy metals. Second of all, plastics, they don't have, where are they? Plastics don't have pores to start with. They might form some during pyrolysis, but a lot of the ability of biochar to hold on to water comes from pores that were actually, these are actually, we're looking at pyrolyzed plant cells here in this hardwood char. It's harder to see the pores in the other pictures, but these are definitely plant cells, and that structure was preserved during pyrolysis. And so if you pyrolyze plastic, you're not going to get as high quality of a product. Second of all, it depends on the plastic. I'm not sure the exact numbers, but there are frequently heavy metal contaminants, like antimony is a catalyst to make number one, PET plastic, like your clear plastic soda bottles. And so I would be concerned about that becoming concentrated in the biochar. Anything that does not turn into a gas, like the like carbon, some of the carbon turns into gas during pyrolysis. Things like metals do not become gases easily, and so they become concentrated in the biochar during pyrolysis. And so you can start with something that is not hazardous in terms of heavy metal content, pyrolyze it, and end up with something hazardous. So you just have to be careful with things like plastics and biosolids, the stuff that goes down the toilet and then gets processed at the waste treatment plant, the solids that they take out of that. Those have to be like very carefully analyzed. But yeah, you could make biochar from either of those things. Some people might not consider it suitable for soil application and say, oh, that's not biochar, you can't apply it to soil. But in theory, you can.
Would the same reason be why landfill would be too?
Well,
not be a good idea?
landfill waste contains non-pyrolyzable materials, like somebody threw out a fridge, you can't pyrolyze that, it's too much metal.
Okay. Too many heavy metals. Okay, well, any questions? Any more questions in the chat function? This is wonderful.
Oh,
No, there's nothing else that I see.
I'm just gonna copy paste the spelling of bufflegrass because I think it just went to me. Okay.
Oh, bufflegrass.
Yeah.
Okay. No, we didn't, none of us saw it. Okay. So again, thank you all for coming to this program, and thank you, Dr. Rivka Fidel, for doing this. It was really fascinating. It was just something many of us haven't heard of and had no idea that this was on the table. So thank you very much.
Happy to be here.
And we appreciate lots of thank yous coming in, and thank you very much.